Alright, this is not a video that I necessarily plan to make, but it's one I feel I have to. Because I'm not really somebody that likes to focus on the bad or negative. I don't dwell over things that are out of my control. I like to just enjoy things that I enjoy. I've always been big on different video games and the lore behind those games, the story. I play a lot of games that have really compelling stories, and I like dabbling into them, learning about them, each character, and I also like theorizing on different possibilities, connecting different dots, etc. And Genshin Impact, when I first started playing this game, I just got so immersed with the lore, the characters, the rich history of Teyvat. I thought they did a really good job at telling a story and creating very dynamic characters. But then there's Natlan, the most controversial region we've ever had. People are very unhappy with Natlan when it comes to the nation itself, the characters from Natlan, and well, the main story, the Archon quest. And I gotta be honest, although there are a lot of things that I do like about Natlan, a lot of things I think they did really well, if I'm being honest, it is my least favorite nation out of all of them, and my least favorite Archon quest. And that's unfortunate because I've been playing this game since the day it came out. And when they released the teaser for each region, right away I knew that both Fontaine and Natlan were gonna be my favorite regions. Fontaine lived up to that, and even exceeded it in some ways. Natlan, on the other hand, I honestly felt like I was lied to. I felt they betrayed the premise that they promised us with Natlan. Now right away I just want to say, if you're somebody that really loves Natlan, I'm not trying to unjustify your feelings like that. Everyone experiences and enjoys this game in their own way, and I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong for disagreeing with me or anything like that. On the contrary, if you really loved Natlan, I'm happy for you. That makes me happy that you did. But rather than this being a video that's just me complaining, I hope to express maybe some of the frustrations that the majority of the players have with Natlan. What they did wrong, what they actually did right with Natlan, and what they could do to avoid this in the future when it comes to Shaznaya, Conria, etc. Because when it comes to Natlan, they set themselves up so nicely. Natlan was this very intriguing region because it was the region that was most isolated from the rest. Obviously, we learned later on that's because of the lack of ley lines, but the game went out of its way to tell us that people from Natlan don't really venture out of their home region. It's a region plagued by war, dragons, and a lot of mystery to it, where the other regions really interacted with each other much more. And if I'm being honest, Genshin usually has some pretty good world quests in every single nation, but the world quests within Natlan, specifically the 5.5 one we just played through with the new volcano location, was far better than the Archon quest, and that shouldn't be the case. And it also doesn't help Natlan's case with this whole VA fiasco. Maybe some of you don't use the English voice acting, but I do because, well, I speak English, and I would prefer to hear it over reading. It even makes it worse when, like, characters don't talk but a few of them do. This was very obvious in 5.1. Even though that Archon quest was probably the best that Natlan had between the three, having half the characters not voice acted was just, I found it very distracting. And that is just the cherry on top of an already very controversial Archon quest and nation. But before I go over what Natlan did wrong and what they actually did right, I'm going to very briefly summarize all of the nations leading up to Natlan, and you'll start to see why Natlan really just dropped the ball. Let's start with Mondstadt. Now, Mondstadt's goal is to introduce us to Genshin Impact, introduce us to the free characters in the Knights of Avonius, the concepts of Teyvat, a more simplistic and digestible story, introducing the Abyss Order, Dvalin, Venti, who is our first Archon. And when you actually go to Mondstadt, the nation is very open and simplistic. It represents freedom. Mondstadt is a great place to start in Genshin Impact and be introduced to this story. And at the very end, we're introduced to the Fatui Harbingers, our first real villain of the game. But as we are right now, we're hooked on the story. Characters in Mondstadt made sense for that region. You got the Adventurers Guild, the Knights, and I felt it accomplished what it meant to do. Then we go to Liyue, the nation of contracts and business, a very cultured nation, and all of the characters perfectly fit that theme too. Now, the whole point of Liyue's story is to explore the human side of it when Rex Lapis fakes his own death and we're helped by another Fatui Harbinger, who is probably not but definitely will betray us. But the intrigue of a god that died right off the bat was enticing. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Liyue's Archon quest only really got super good for me right at the end, especially when they all band together to fight off Osile. And that fight with Tartaglia was epic. The first time I ever played through this, I thought it was crazy. But the middle of the Archon quest is a lot of filler, but what it actually does successfully is it establishes a lot of the lore and history of Liyue. We have to go meet the Adepti, who feel that they're being pushed to the side. The ancient gods and the Adepti ruled Liyue for a long time, centuries, thousands of years. But now Liyue Harbor has fell into the hands of humans, and humans for the most part run Liyue. This entire quest was about bringing Adepti and humans together to be able to protect their own nation so that they don't need an Archon, which again introduces us to a lot of different themes for the future of Genshin. Rex Lapis actually being alive and being with us through the entire quest, and we didn't know it. Well, some of us did. And then there's Inazuma. Now, Inazuma gets a lot of flack, and a big part of that is because it came out during COVID. There was a lot of rules and people being sent home from work, lockdowns, etc. So they had to rush this Archon quest. That is why the second half finished in 2.1, just one patch after Inazuma was released. But either way, Inazuma did its job too. It was supposed to be a very tense and hostile nation, a nation more or less under a dictatorship. And we got a lot of intense moments in that Archon quest, like the Raiden Shogun having Toma brought before everyone to confiscate his vision. We know many people died during the Vision Hunt Decree, so this created a lot of tension, even our life being in danger. When Signora was killed for the first time, I couldn't believe it. Right up until the moment we're almost about to be killed too, and Kazuha saves our life. And just as you roam the lands of Inazuma, you feel the Vision Decree, the state that this nation is in. There's a lot of battlegrounds, no man's lands, islands that are corrupt by a dead god, a lot of areas that you could tell a battle took place. In a lot of ways, Inazuma felt more like the nation of war than Natlan did. And whether you liked Inazuma at all or not, it did what it was supposed to do. Gave us a nation under a dictatorship, under a decree, and just the sheer Japanese culture that Inazuma was based on. It nailed it out of the park. The architecture, the music, the aesthetic and culture of the characters, and everything about it. The island hopping was fun. Sumeru and Fontaine follow the same trend. Wisdom, the academia, the conflict between the people of the desert and the people of the rainforest, the misunderstanding of King Deshret and Rukkhadevada's relationship, the people of the desert feeling like they're ostracized and there being a literal barrier between the rainforest and the desert. Without any context, yeah, it looks like they're trying to isolate the desert people like they're lesser. And the academia spreading misinformation and manipulating people through the Akasha and dreams, with Ildadori behind the scenes. A much more complex and intuitive Archon quest, but it did its job. And Fontaine, chef's kiss. By far the best region in my opinion. The culture and vibe that it wanted to capture, it did it so well. The theme of the courts, justice, but also having that theme around facade and plays. The Fortress of Meripede, the underwater, Fontaine being the most technologically advanced civilization, having a much more advanced culture, which is why they have courtrooms and they solve their problems through the courts. Having the most elegant and advanced culture in all of Tevat, Fontaine captured what it was supposed to do, which is why people loved Fontaine. Then we get to Natlan, and everything they told us about Natlan was effectively a lie. Most of the information that we got on Natlan prior to the little breadcrumbs they gave us leading up to Natlan was Vanessa and her tribe. Vanessa was the first ever Grand Master of the Knights of Avonius, and we knew that people in Natlan lived in tribes and were fighting a war of some kind, but we didn't know what the war was. We also haven't really heard much about Natlan at this point or met any characters really, but what we knew about Vanessa was that her tribe abandoned Natlan for some reason, found themselves in Mondstadt, but then were attacked by a dragon, and then the rich nobles and the aristocrats of Mondstadt enslaved them. The people of Natlan were supposed to be a very warrior culture vibe, being more primitive people when it comes to technology, human society, but being much smarter people when it comes to surviving in the wilderness, combat fighting in sense, a very hardened and hardy people. Which is why when Vanessa was enslaved and put in the gladiator ring in Mondstadt, she was easily undefeated. The culture surrounding Natlan was supposed to be that of people that passed down fighting techniques, survival techniques, and just being a culture of people hardened from battle. I expected a very similar vibe to Inazuma being a very tense and hostile nation and being polar opposite to Fontaine with its very advanced and etiquette culture. It's not to say that the people of Natlan were going to be stupid, but their intelligence would have been survival, war and battle tactics, battle prowess, honor and glory dying in battle. I guess a very Viking-like culture, not afraid of death and going into war, which would have made for an amazing region. But that is not what we got. They also made a great deal to hint towards the dragons of Natlan, a nation with humans and dragons at war. We weren't even 100% what this looked like either, but it was intriguing. And then we got the first trailer of Natlan, and then what followed was the Natlan Archon quest, up until our current game. And what we got was very different than what we all expected, and honestly quite different from what the game actually told us that Natlan should be. Now before I talk about the things that I think Natlan did wrong, I want to talk about what it did right. Firstly, I like the concept of Natlan's theme, African and Aztec culture, the Wayab, the Night Kingdom. This concept of no ley lines in Natlan was very cool. I also think Natlan had some of the craziest scenes within an Archon quest, like the reveal of the false sky. That whole sequence when we're at war with the Abyss was intense. This is by far my favorite part of the entire quest because it's the only time I felt I was in the nation of war. There are parts in this whole sequence where you actually have to pick who you save, and if you choose to save one person, the other people, when you try to go save them next, it says they're already fallen in battle. You weren't able to save them in time, they died. This felt very real and very engaging. I also loved the sequence with the captain and Ranova. And honestly, everything about the Shade of Death, really. It's nice to finally get a Shade of Death play a prominent role within the story, not just talked about in an old book. So Natlan did do a lot of things right. But what I absolutely hated about Natlan is that the tribes all got along. Everyone was just hunky-dory and bubbly. Best of pals. Hated it. And I also hated that the dragons aren't even dragons. I'm sorry. These are not dragons. These are just critters or creatures. Nothing about them is dragon-like, which is why so many people teased that Natlan was the nation of Pokemon, because it felt like these characters had their little companions. What I did like about Natlan was the Abyss. The Abyss was the prominent factor for the war, which again, it's a reoccurring thing in Genshin, and each nation experiences and talks about the Abyss in different ways, like Fontaine with the Narcissus coins, Inazuma during the Cataclysm with the Raiden Shogun's friends in her past and her flashback, Mondstadt with the Abyss Order, and Diluc in his conquest to fight back the Abyss. Each nation has their own run-ins with the Abyss, but Natlan, it made sense to just go to war with it. But we know the Abyss functions like a virus, like a plague. It corrupts the mind. It doesn't just kill you and kill your inhabitants, it brings out the worst malice in everyone. Whether you're a human or a deity like God, like a sovereign, like Shukato, who burned the ley lines to begin with. I love this whole concept of having the Wayab because your dragon turned on you because of the Abyss, and having a human become an Archon because he had to step up and kill that dragon once that dragon was already corrupted beyond no return. All concepts that I love, but what they should have done is have actual proper dragons fighting humans and killing each other, and have the tribes at war with each other, at odds. Make it so that Natlan is very divided. Each tribe is just looking out for themselves, trying to survive the Abyss and going to constant war with each other. And the Abyss, being the way that it is, how it corrupts them, playing off of that malice. So the Abyss could have been the overarching nemesis of that whole chapter. All of these tribes fighting each other, and entire generations of bad blood. Each tribe befriending a very cool looking dragon, using them to fight and protect and work with them. And this whole Archon quest could have been trying to bring these nations together to fight the common enemy, the abyss that's feeding off of their war and malice. A similar vibe with the abyss and its monsters attacking all of the tribes, but each tribe looking out for themselves, and Natlan slowly on the brink of collapse. That could have been a very intense Archon quest where we, the traveler, have to make friends with all of the tribes, help them all individually, and try to bring them together, take the most exceptional hero from every tribe, bring them together to fight a common enemy. And then the future of Natlan once the Archon quest is over is a nation where the tribes now get along. But there will still always be that bad blood, which would have even made the world quests in Natlan that much more engaging. And with that, I think the nation would have looked a little bit more bleak, not so colorful and happy-go-lucky. Similar to Inazuma, where you would have seen battlegrounds with arrows and weapons and, just rubble from a war or battle that took place. Each tribe could have been specific to itself, where you got to go visit, and it was very tense, but the lands and the exploration of Natlan would have been a little bit more bleak, a little bit more volcanic, a little bit more gritty. Which brings us now to the characters. In a vacuum, just if you took Natlan and its characters and everything about Natlan and put it in its own game, it's fun. I like the characters. The nation looks cool, the soundtrack is good, the Saurians have pretty cool gimmicks. Natlan isn't my favorite to explore, but it's not my least favorite. Most nations aren't that different. Like, if you were to step into Sumeru and then go to Liyue, you can see a difference, but it's not insanely different. Just some different mechanics and different landscapes. Natlan actually, to its credit, feels a bit different than the other nations. But it looks way too upbeat for my liking. And the Saurians don't look like dragons. And the people just look way too upbeat too. They're all just best of pals. I'm sorry, I have nothing against Kachina. But the fact that a big portion of the beginning of 3.0 was her winning the tournament to go to the war, I just can't take it seriously. The fact that this character is going to fight in Natlan's war, she looks like a chia pet. And again, nothing against the character, but she just doesn't look like somebody from the Nation of War to me, riding a spinning top. And that's another problem. All of these weird mechanical gimmicks like the rollerblades, the pistol, and of course the motorcycle. Again, in a vacuum, it all seems pretty cool. Shilonen is one of my favorite characters in the game, and is one of my favorite characters to use as a playable character. I love having her on different team comps. I can't lie. I hate that she uses rollerblades. It makes no sense. Now I know some of you will say, well, in the lore of Natlan, they justify why there's technology from the old dragon civilization. Yes, now obviously I understand that the old dragon civilizations within Natlan very specifically were all very technologically advanced. We learned that especially in 5.5. So justification for there being very advanced technologies within Natlan, justifying contraptions like the motorbike, the pistol, the rollerblades, etc., can be explained by lore. But I also find that to be an excuse. You could have still kept those aspects about the old dragon civilizations, make for an interesting story, while having Natlan characters and that whole nation feel like the Nation of War, Natlan, going along with the themes it represents. It just felt very confusing and conflicting, the nation's whole aesthetic, but then you have these weird contraptions. And I for one just didn't like it. You could have kept it so Natlan had its own very specific vibe and theme, but once you dabble into the world quest, you start to uncover some ancient technologies, which clearly most people in Natlan within their tribes don't live like this anyway. That suits Fontaine much more. It being the more industrial nation, having characters ride gizmos and contraptions would have made sense more for Fontaine. But in Natlan, it felt very much like they were including this just for the sale of the characters, to make them more intriguing for exploration. Each character having a gimmick that mimics the Saurians, so that the free-to-play can traverse the puzzles, but if you want to pull on one of these characters, you can use one of their cool traversing gimmicks more fluidly, I guess. But only when you're in Natlan, because if you try to use your motorbike not in Natlan, it lasts 2 seconds. The point I'm trying to make here with this is that let us believe one thing leading up to Natlan and gave us something else. I was hoping to see warriors. The point being is that these characters and their gimmicks didn't feel like they were from the Nation of War. You know what would have felt more engaging and really enticed me into the story though? If you had Kachina be a young warrior that looked like a warrior that was up and coming from her tribe, but then she gets caught in a fight with another tribe, fighting for her life, and we have to save her life or something like that. Because each tribe and its young folk have to grow up in a very tense nation, fighting different tribes, fighting different dragons, and surviving the abyss. That would have been way more engaging to me. And Natlan's characters looking very warrior-like and battle-hardened. Not so playful and just super friendly with each other. I don't hate the fact that Mulaney and Kachina are good pals and they're trying to encourage each other for the tournament. But it would have been nice to see them hate each other too. Each tribe hating each other. And it would have made it feel so good to bring them all together. The captain, I felt, was written well, but I felt he just conceded way too quickly. I loved his whole honorable peak human shtick, but I'm not gonna lie, I would have liked to see him put up more of a fight, not just giving up on his plan to save Natlan right away and just agreeing with the Pyro Archon. I would have liked to see a little bit more tension there, that drawn out a little more. Maybe we have to earn his respect a little bit more. I loved how he was able to stick it to the Shade of Death. I wouldn't really change too much with that. I felt his story with his history of the Conrians, their immortality. He's obviously been carrying around this burden, so I feel that was actually really well done with the Shade of Death. Like I said, a lot of themes of Natlan were done well, but it's just how they approached it makes no sense, and it just makes exploring that nation not feel like the Nation of War. They shouldn't have even called it the Nation of War. I don't know why they did. Because they're fighting the Abyss? So is everywhere else. D-Luke single-handedly fighting the Abyss Order every night. Still the Nation of Freedom. Then you got the Pyro Archon. Now I know people are unhappy about the Pyro Archon in almost any capacity. I felt her design was perfect, it was spot on. Why she's wearing a biker suit and riding a bike is totally stupid to me, especially since she's from Natlan. And you know what really kills me the most is when you watch her trailers from 500 years ago, she already had the perfect aesthetic for the Pyro Archon. She looked like a warrior human Archon. And I love the concept of Natlan having to have a human become the Archon. Because unlike the other nations, a human that earns divinity will be able to relate to the day-to-day struggles of the people more. And it means that an Archon won't live longer than a normal human lifespan. I thought this was a very unique concept, just poorly executed. This whole quest could have been about the Archon and all of the tribes being so disconnected and at war with each other, and the Archon maybe giving up on her role or trying to keep the Abyss at bay with the Sacred Flame, while simultaneously trying to bring her nation together, and she just needs our help to do it. That, or, you know what, it actually would have been pretty cool if Natlan was the first nation we went to where it didn't even have an active Archon, which would have made the concept of us not being able to resonate with the statue more impactful, and then us having to inherit the role of Archon temporarily. Or maybe we actually get a new Archon while the quest is happening. Somebody exceptional takes the mantle. A nation with the human tribes and Saurians killing each other for generations, now having to work together. It just would have made so much more sense to me. But again, I don't even think people hated what we gotted so much until we got to the very end. It felt like so much build-up to go finally combat the Abyss once and for all with the Pyro Archon, and it felt very, I didn't feel much. I felt much more when the Raiden Shogun cut down Signora, and then we get that feeling when we walk outside and our heads all dazed. Like we don't know what just happened. That whole sequence with the court battles for the first time. Seeing them do their magic show, only for something bad to happen, and now it's an investigation. This was super engaging. I just needed to know what happened next. Experiencing the same day over and over again in Sumeru, I had no idea what was going to happen. It was fun to speculate and theorize on what was happening, and what's going on with the people of the desert. Getting to see the Adeptine humans working together despite their differences to defeat a god that Rex Lapis defeated himself long ago. Could this nation protect itself if he retired? Natlan just never hit for me this way, never made me feel these things. Yes, the false guy being revealed was one of the coolest things that ever happened in an Archon quest, but that is not exclusive to Natlan. That could have happened in Fontaine or Sumeru or whatever. It still would have hit the same, because the significance of that was teasing the more overarching plot of Teyvat, the big picture, finally teasing the false guy that was teased to us many years ago. It didn't have anything specific to do with Natlan though. The main climax of Natlan's story was pretty What would have been much cooler is to fight a reawakened or revived Shukato, the same dragon that burned the ley lines, having our current human Pyro Archon defeat the reawakened Pyro Sovereign Just like the original Pyro Archon had to defeat this dragon to become the first Pyro Archon, and make his deal with the Shade of Death to protect Natlan from its non-existent ley lines, and maybe have Little One take the mantle of the new Dragon Sovereign, or something to that effect. It would have been way more impactful. What I find kind of funny though, is people hated this whole sequence where we get celebrated for basically saving the nation. This is actually one of the scenes that I didn't mind about Natlan. It was actually nice to go to a nation, solve its major crisis, be a hero, and be appreciated. But yeah, the whole dancing was cringe, I know. I also didn't like how they handled the Pyro Traveler. Like, it was very intriguing and something different. When we come to the Statue of the Seven in a new region, we usually resonate with the element. It's been like this since day one of the game, but when we first got to Natlan in 3.0, we could not. This left us with a lot of interesting theories and possibilities, but it ended up being a whole lot of nothing. Again, it could have fit into the theme of Natlan doesn't have a current Archon, or maybe the nation has to be united with its tribes. Really, anything they could have come up with would have been better than what we got. But to summarize, I don't actually hate Natlan as much as this video might make you think I do. And honestly, I'm pretty optimistic for the future of Genshin Impact. Yes, Natlan was definitely a bump in the road, especially after such banger patches like Sumeru and Fontaine. The Natlan characters, although I liked them, felt a little off for the nation's theme, the Nation of War. The Archon quest had its good moments, but I felt they could have done so much more with it. The music and the aesthetic of Natlan is beautiful, but again, I'm not seeing the war part of it. And the way they went about the dragons being a part of Natlan civilization, although I like the Saurians and their gimmicks and their exploration, it's just really not what I was picturing. And I know some of you will justify it as, well, Genshin Impact is a animated style game. Yes, I understand that, and I'm not expecting it to be very bleak, like Elden Ring or anything, but look at Inazuma again as a good example. That nation did feel pretty bleak. You could feel the Vision Hunt decree. So it is possible that they could have done Natlan a little bit better in that regard. Have the character's aesthetic fit the nation a little bit better. They had the blueprints for something amazing, and they really did have some good story elements, like we talked about in the video. But ultimately, just the end product just wasn't it. Now, I know that Genshin Impact doesn't necessarily have the best reputation for listening to its fan base, but I'm fairly confident with Shaznaya's whole theme, along with Nod Cry, the teasers we've been getting about the moons, the factions that'll be there, the Fatui Harbingers, the Knights of Avonius with Grandmaster Varka, the Hegson Circle, that the future of Genshin Impact looks good. And they're definitely aware that Natlan is not a fan favorite. So hopefully, they take that to heart and make Nod Cry the best region we've ever had. Because honestly, Nod Cry can be a slam dunk if they wanted to. They have the elements there to make it perfect. But anyways, thank you for listening to my video. Let me know your thoughts about Natlan. If you're somebody that wholeheartedly just enjoyed it and it's one of your favorite Archon quests, I am not trying to discredit you. But since I cover the lore of this game, I thought it was worth addressing. And rather than just be completely negative, talking about it, having a discussion, and acknowledging the faults of Natlan so that we can move forward, I felt is the best way to go. But if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. I don't mind making these types of videos and breakdowns more if it's something you enjoy. And as always, we will see you all in the next one. Later.